Faster than a speeding bullet.
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
More powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus. Resilient. Highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound.
Hey guys, Jared Moon here, and welcome to the Better Humanology podcast. Today, our guest is best-selling author, Dr. John J. Ratey. Really cool guy. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I got out of this conversation, then I'm going to read a little bit of his background. Really cool stuff. So what he deals with primarily is exercise in the brain and how it relates. He has some amazing TED Talks about this stuff. You guys should definitely research further after you listen to this podcast. He talks about we talk a lot about children, and because that's a lot of what his research is involved in, and children being smarter, fitter, and everything in between when they just do some simple exercises before school. Very cool stuff. But also, if you are, an entrepreneur, or you really want to get your mental game on point, and you can, maybe start a little exercise routine right before you work out. We talk about what to do, how you could do it, in little routines you could add just like 10 minutes before starting your workday that can really fire up the brain and have you working at full capacity. So definitely listen to this one. I'm going to read his background now because it is really cool. He has a ton of experience, and I really had fun on this one. So as I said, best-selling author, John J. Ratey, MD, is an associate clinical professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and an internationally recognized expert in neuropsychiatry. He has published over 60 peer-reviewed articles and 11 books published in 17 languages, including the groundbreaking ADD-ADHD Driven to Distraction series with Ned Hallowell, also a medical doctor, with the publication of Spark, the Revolutionary New Science of Exercise in the Brain. And that's one of his most popular books, guys. That one's really cool. Definitely read that one. Now, Dr. Ratey has established himself as one of the world's foremost authorities on brain fitness connection. His most recent book, Go Wild, explores how we can achieve optimal physical and mental health by getting in touch with our caveman roots and how we can re-wild our lives. Very cool stuff, guys. It's really cool to talk about these things because fitness is very important. I think that we get a little caught up sometimes on let's reduce inflammation, let's change our diet, let's do this, let's do that. And we can overlook at times how truly important it is to be fit, to have your body operating how it should. So without any further ado, here is Dr. John Ratey. All right, Dr. Ratey, I am very glad to have you on the podcast today. Very interested into diving into our conversation. But I'd like to kick things off with a little icebreaker for you, for me, and for everybody listening. So we're going to get started. If you could give everybody a fitness challenge for today.
Well, I would have everybody do 10 Hindu squats. That's to put your arms out in front of you, pull them really tight back, then go down and touch the ground, all the way down, and then do that 10 times.
Awesome.
Pull it in.
Get the blood moving. I love it.
Well, get your brain turned on.
Yeah, and that's why I can't wait to talk to you today. All right, and how about a mental toughness challenge?
Well, mental toughness is reading some of the papers that I have to read, but I think the best thing to do is perhaps just to remain on one foot for 30 seconds, and then the other one for 30 seconds, and keep that up for 4 minutes, and you have to use your brain to guide your body and keep yourself balanced. It's a good way to, one, improve your balance, but also you really have to use your frontal cortex to keep yourself balanced there. Very
cool. And now, how about a book recommendation?
Well, there's a lot of books, but I would recommend that your listeners read my book, Spark, the Revolutionary New Science of Exercise in the Brain. It really continues to be the touchstone for many people who want to learn about how exercise improves brain function, mental function, cognitive function, and certainly emotional regulation. So it really gives people motivation to continue their exercise program or to begin one.
Yeah, and I think some of the research that you talk about and have done, I think is really phenomenal. So I'm looking forward to jumping into that. But first, if you could just give everybody maybe a quick background, professional history, and kind of how you got into the brain and exercise and how it can be stimulated and how they work off of one another, like how you got into this field.
Yes. Well, I've always been an athlete, for one thing, and I went to medical school and became an MD, and with the intent of becoming a psychiatrist. And I spent the late 70s here in Boston when the Boston Marathon was just exploding, with Bill Rogers and everyone learning about the marathon, doing the marathon. And I got into this field because of the marathon. I got into it because I began to see patients who had to stop running because of an injury. And then one in particular who was a brilliant professor at both Harvard and MIT, and a MacArthur Fellow, came to me and said he had symptoms of adult attention deficit disorder. This is a fellow who was enormously productive, always throughout his life, and had always been a marathoner and always in training and etc. And he came up with a knee injury and he had to stop. So he became depressed. And then after that resolved, he became, he couldn't get his usual work style started. He would procrastinate. He would get angry. He would get frustrated. He wouldn't begin his work. And so the classic symptoms of attention deficit disorder. And I began to think and see that there was a relationship between the lack of exercise in this fellow and many others and attentional difficulties, and went on for many years to learn about, teach about, write about attention deficit disorder, always knowing that exercise was a great way to help treat it. It was always, I wrote 3 books with Dr. Ned Hallowell on attention deficit disorder, including the big one, which was Driven to Distraction back in 1993. And it's still sort of the Bible of people with ADHD. And in it and all of our other books, we talk a lot about using exercise to help regulate your attention system in your brain. So I began my career sort of paying very much attention to what exercise was being shown to do for our brains, for our moods, for attention, and began to follow the scientific literature there. And then in 2003, I became aware of a school in Naperville, Illinois, which was broadcast on Frontline as we were beginning to worry about the obesity crisis. And here was a school system of 19,000 kids who they had measured and found that only 3% of them were overweight, and not one child in high school, their 7,500 kids in their high school, was obese. Part of that, and a major reason for that, was that they had a dynamite PE program that had evolved over the years into one focused on fitness, and fitness is the primary goal of PE. Games were added back. Initially, they took all the sports out of it and just focused on running and calisthenics. And they took sports out of it, but they reintroduced them. But it was 2-on-2, 3-on-3. Everybody played in a sport every day. And they had a brilliant move about 5 years into it. They put on heart rate monitors, and kids got their grades by the amount of time they spent in their cardiac training zone. So this was a propellant to get everyone exercising and to get everyone fit. And by golly, they did. What really got me so interested is that 2 years before this, 99% of their kids took the International Science and Math Test. It's a test that every country takes every 3 years. They took it, and as a country, you could do that, and they came in number 1 in the world in science and number 6 in math. So not only were they among the fittest kids in the world, but they were among the smartest. So it led me to write the book Spark, because it was so phenomenal. This experience, this school, and the first chapter is really talking about the school and seeing how this impacted everyone, and including the community eventually. Naperville is one of the top 10 places in the U.S. to live by all different rating scales, etc. So that led me to really research exercise in a very different way, going all the way back to the hunter-gatherer time, and realizing that we still are hunter-gatherers according to our genes, because we were hunter-gatherers as of 10,000 years ago. We were still moving a lot, and then we began to farm, and more recently we began to sit 9 to 10 hours a day. And this has led to many of our physical, medical, psychiatric problems that we see growing ever more today.
And I would like to really break that down into 2 parts. I really appreciate the background and phenomenal story, Naperville, and your history and getting involved and your fascination with it. Now, I would love to talk about kind of big picture, the why. Now, why is exercise? I mean, you don't have to preach it much to me as a strength and conditioning coach. As my primary job, I want people moving and getting out there and doing things, but sometimes, the why is not big enough for people to get out there and do it. So what is it, like, how can exercise affect your brain? Why is it affecting your brain and helping, making us better?
Well, first off, it creates the best environment in your brain for learning. What we know evolutionarily, our big brains evolved over this hunter-gatherer period of 8 million years or so. Our big brain evolved to help us be the best movers, to help us be able to adapt to new environments, to be able to think through things, and eventually our moving brain became our thinking brain. So really, our thinking brain is the evolutionary internalization of movement. So when we move, we activate our thinking nerve cells. At the same time, when we do that, we help regulate our emotional life. That is, we improve our moods, we improve our ability to deal with stresses, we decrease the anxiety, we improve our motivation for everything, and this leads to a better overall sense of well-being and outcome. Now, most importantly, for a while there, we were doing all this research really from the mid-90s till now on exercise and its help and its preventive effect on developing cognitive decline as we age and Alzheimer's disease. And that's important even for your clients today who are not worried about that, but they will. But it's a good way of thinking about keeping our brain cells young and perky. We have 100 million of them, and we need them. And when we use them, they get tougher. They're very much like a muscle. In fact, in 2000, we began to think of the brain as a muscle. The more we use it, the better and stronger it gets. And when we exercise, we're using more of our 100 billion brain cells. than in any other human activity. We activate more brain cells. And when we activate them, it's just like activating your muscle fibers. You cause them to change. You cause them to grow. You release all kinds of things, or neurotransmitters, or growth factors that help our brains grow and help our brain cells remain young and perky. It is really the way we manage to have our brain cells be the best they can be, to help us take in information and manage it, store it, call it up. We know so much about what exercise does, and exercise in both aerobic and strength training, as well as balance, and anything that you do that is considered exercise. It really is. Yoga, for instance, and other of the martial arts. They're actually very intense exercise, because you're really putting your muscles and your brain into play when you're moving. And so we have all this data, science showing what we actually do when we exercise. We release not just our neurotransmitters, but we cause a lot of release of various growth factors in the brain. And this becomes very helpful to have our brains be available for us in the best way possible.
And what would you say is the minimal effective dose for exercise or activity for people to benefit? You mentioned a lot of different things, from yoga to martial arts and higher intensity, but what would you recommend maybe as a baseline for someone looking to exercise primarily for cognitive benefits?
Well, our Health and Human Services did a lot of work in this area over the years, and came up with about a guide of 150 minutes a week of basically exercise where you get your heart rate up, so aerobic exercise. But mixed in with that is strength training. So that's the base. That's the minimum. That's a way of ensuring that your brain is going to be challenged and help to grow and prosper best. So that's the base. What's the minimum on a day-to-day basis? So that would break down to about 35 minutes or 40 minutes a day. And you should mix it up with aerobic and certainly strength training. Now, what's the minimum that will get your brain turned on for that day? See, there's two effects. There's an acute effect, like today, right now, what's happening after I exercise, and a chronic effect. That is how my brain changes over time, and because your brain grows. And when you exercise, we know that your brain grows more for a variety of reasons. You prevent erosion, but you also promote brain growth, and then the process called neurogenesis, where we make new brain cells every day. And when we stimulate our brain, we make more of it, and exercise makes the most. So we know this in animals and in humans. We have data showing this. And so the minimum dose is what you can do. So even 10 minutes can promote these your brain cells from releasing very nice factors that help your brain cells grow and be ready to deal with the world.
Yeah, and that's what I was kind of interested in, mainly from a personal perspective. After I, kind of stumbled across your information and started reading more and watching some of your videos and all of that stuff, I was I work out about an hour a day, 5 days a week right now. But then I was wondering, if I should start some sort of quick, 10-minute practice before my workday starts, just to get my brain more engaged. Would you say that's a good practice or habit to get into?
Sure. What I recommend and do on occasion, especially when I'm traveling and I don't get to the gym in the morning, which I usually do, is a nice little app called the 7-Minute Exercise. It developed by Jim Lair and his team down at Human Performance Institute in Orlando, Florida. It was in the New York Times. It's really on your, you can, at your app store, you can get it. But 7 minutes, it takes you through exercises for all of your major muscle groups. But it really gets your heart rate up, gets your muscles active, keeps you going for just 7 minutes. And it's a great way to start the day if you just can't get out and do what you usually.
And I've noticed just kind of in our conversation so far, you've seemed to put a little bit of an emphasis on strength training. Is there a reason why you think strength training is pretty important?
No, I put emphasis on that because it's always undersold. People, most of the animal data certainly comes from aerobic exercise, getting our rats and mice and dogs and cats to run or move, and measuring stuff in their brains that change. As well as humans, we have a lot of data there. And now we're accumulating more and more data in the strength area, both humans mainly, but also now even animals. We're figuring out ways of challenging their strength and building their strength. So that it's something that we now are more aware of, and we're aware of it, especially as we age. We need to increase the amount of time spent on strength training and balance training and all that, as well as keep your aerobic ability up there.
And I have a question about that. I have 3 kids, so maybe some people listening to this have some kids going to school and they don't have the best, exercise program or something. Is there something that you'd recommend to do with your children before school or on a regular basis to kind of get their brains engaged? Because it's hard to look at Naperville and not think, not want your kids to benefit from not only being healthier, fitter, and all of that is just better test scores. That's amazingly impressive. So is there something that you recommend for getting your kids more involved? Yeah,
I certainly, it's great to do something in the morning if they want to play a vigorous game. That's great, but something as simple and as good as jump rope for 5 minutes. We'll get their heart rate pumping. We'll get their muscles up. We'll get everything going. And I find that to be one of the best exercises you can do on a spur of the moment. But really, even taking a walk, we have lots of data about that taking a walk really promotes a lot of these changes in the chemistry of the brain immediately. And standing versus sitting, all that means something. So you're seeing schools now come out with the standing desk. You're seeing the Silicon Valley people using not just standing desks, but tread desks, treadmills under their desks to keep moving a mile an hour during the day while they're at their computers. And we're seeing schools that are putting in exercise as a way not just to improve physical health, but improve mental health and cognitive awareness. I helped start a program with Reebok called BOKS, B-O-K-S. It's now in 3,300 schools in the U.S. And it's an elementary school program before school. They go in an hour early from K through 5. And play these vigorous games, all on a voluntary basis. But it's very, very popular, and once it starts, it continues. People want to come back to it. The teachers support it, see the value of it, and in some cases they've included that as a first period in general, aside from whatever PE they might already have in recess, etc. So it's something that to get kids moving, and you change their day, you change their brain.
And I think that's a phenomenal initiative. And have you been able to track any results or benefits to the kids, those 3,300 schools going through that?
Yes. Well, there's a study ongoing now. The first paper came out 6 months ago, within the last 6 months, showing an improvement in those. And they did a nice study looking at one group who had it, one group who didn't. The kids who had it, after 6 months, their BMIs were better. They had lost some weight and were more age appropriate. They didn't do the look at the data, the test scores yet, but that's to come, or grades. But they did find that the kids were more agreeable. They were more motivated. The kids that did the exercise in the morning, and they're more easy to be in class, according to the teachers. So already we have evidence, and this is now a fairly ongoing big study that will look at those vital questions of whether or not this improves grades, if it decreases disciplinary action, and we know that it does, but that's in non-studied samples, and we know that it really has a big effect on making the kids more motivated to learn, etc.
And now going opposite end of our children is, if someone's out here, they're listening to this and maybe they don't have the best fitness practice, is it ever too late to start? It's
never too late. We have people who start in their 70s or in their 60s who start an exercise program and they change their life. You start in middle age, which is hard to know what middle age is these days, and you've never exercised, but if you start a regular exercise program and you get up to 30 minutes, 5 days a week, you will prevent cognitive decline from appearing in your life by about 10 to 15 years.
Wow.
So you'll keep your brain functioning and you'll cut the risk of Alzheimer's disease in half. Those are facts that we know and have been repeated over and over again.
That's incredible. And we talked about the acute effect of maybe 10 minutes of exercise before starting your workday or something. And then you mentioned chronic as well. So to see some of these longer term benefits, you're talking about depression relief and, obviously weight loss, but more on the cognitive side, improved test scores even for children. How long does the chronic effect take to really make a change?
Well, chronic means ongoing. So you begin to see brain growth and brain changes within 3 months. You actually see more brain being added to those people who begin to exercise. And these are a group of kids. They were adults in their 25 to 35 who had never exercised and began to exercise versus another, again, a control group who didn't exercise. And the exercising adults improved their test scores by 11%. And their brain, as so far as we could see in one area, improved or increased the blood flow to a very important area in our memory system called the hippocampus by about 30%. So you were seeing a change there, and the idea is that this is where we add new brain cells every day, and exercise promotes that rapid growth.
Now, if you were to, take this to the workplace, if you will, how would you best recommend? You mentioned standing desks, you mentioned tread desks and stuff. If someone wanted to implement this, say with their team at work, what would you recommend? I know you have the before school program for kids, but if someone did want to implement it at an office, what would your recommendation be for getting people a little bit more engaged?
Well, I think companies are doing that, but they have to redo. People can do it on their own. That is going out for a walking lunch. Going, not just sitting down or taking a coffee break to make it an exercise break. Walk up and down the stairs. Do some calisthenics. Do some yoga poses. Anything that really gets your muscles and your blood moving, and because when that happens, that means necessarily you're getting your brain cells active. And that's what you really want. You want to turn your brain on. So going for a walk, for instance, will turn your brain on. That is, you will have more activity in the key parts of your brain, even after a 10-minute walk. And it's quite striking what it does. So we know from so many papers and so much evidence that exercise puts your brain in the best possible mode for you to be successful, to be using it in the best way possible.
Now, the question that comes to my mind is typically people will always want to say or think that more is better. Now, is there a limit to how much you can really increase or make your brain better through exercise? Like, is there like a point in which there is no more benefit, like you training so many hours per day or something?
Especially in terms of your muscles but also even in terms of aerobic activity. People that train for marathons are usually do their running every day, but they're done fairly quickly. They're not running a marathon. They're running maybe 7 or 8 miles a day as a regular way of keeping their body up, and it's less than an hour. But anywhere they've done studies with the cyclists at the Tour de France, and found that after an hour and a half of very strenuous cycling, that then they begin to release a lot of cortisol, which is stress hormone. In other words, they're so finely tuned that before that, even though they're really exerting themselves, those guys that are most in shape do not release cortisol. They do not show a stress response. But after about an hour and 15 minutes, they begin to show that. So that's my general way of thinking. There's no proof positive of it, but that's what one should think of. And from your training that you really are looking for a day and a half or so of recovery when you're talking about muscle work, at least, or maybe 2 days, to have the recovery process really take hold.
And you mentioned that you've been an athlete your whole life. What sports and athletics have you been involved in, or fitness?
Oh, when I was a kid, it was tennis and basketball and football and everything. But I ended up getting a tennis scholarship to college and played tennis, and then moved into squash, and then ruined my shoulder after 30 years or so of squash. And then since that, along the way, I've also been a gym rat. So, I still do 5Ks and 10Ks and keep myself going that way.
That's really cool. And I think tennis is not only will it keep the mind engaged from what you're talking about, it's one of because it's kind of a singular sport, is an incredible way to build mental toughness. Did you find that as you played?
Oh yeah. To deal with the frustration of missing, not being perfect was great. It was a great life lesson, and builds resilience. Absolutely, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And you don't know you're exercising. That's what's so great about squash. For 45 minutes, you're running to beat the band, but you have no idea that you're exercising. You're not. I mean, after you get in a little bit of shape, it's the game. It's the challenge. It's the competition. It's the fun of it, and you come out drenched, but you don't feel like you've exercised.
Yeah, it's always impressive. I've worn heart rate monitors playing a lot of squash and racquetball myself, and it's impressive the level of workout you get in a very short time period.
Oh yeah, and racquetball you run a little further, but squash you run a little quicker because
that ball doesn't bounce very well.
As soon as the point's over, you're ready to go again. I mean, there is no delay. So it's really constant movement.
Now, if you had to kind of look back at your athletic history, what would you say the hardest workout you've ever done would be?
Well, we go to an exercise spa, if you will, every year, Rancho La Porta in Mexico. And there they have, it's an amazing place. Vegan food grown on the property. It's just gorgeous, and mountains around. And I went on this 5-mile hike. It was anything but a hike. It was a climb, 5-mile climb, and I was completely exhausted, which is hard for me to do, but to get exhausted. But I was just wiped, and that's about 5 years ago. And so that stands out as what more recently has been hard, And then whenever I do CrossFit, because I've done it on and off. I usually overdo it, which is the worst part of CrossFit. People tend to push themselves a little too hard, and I usually twice I end up going back to my bone doctor to say, look, okay, my shoulder, it hurts. I was throwing that ball too hard against the wall. So it's something to be aware of.
Now, you kind of transitioning here to closing it out. You've done a lot of research, you've written a lot of books, and you have a lot of phenomenal information out there. But if you could give our listeners the best advice for becoming a better human being, either through improving their brain or exercise, what would it be that you would have them do, or advice that you could give?
Well, there's a lot of that. I think what we're learning today in terms of science, we're learning that the most important thing in the world for all of us in terms of physical and mental health is remaining connected, not Facebook connected, but real connections where you're with people. Facebook is great to keep you up to date, but in lieu of really interacting, really being in a group, being involved. That's why things like Soul Cycle have taken off, like CrossFit itself. It's all about the group, the spinning classes of old, and still. It's in Peloton now. You have a virtual connection with people all over the world, and that keeps you going. And not only that, but it really has a positive effect on our brains and in our moods and in our bodies. So if you can do exercise with others, that's the best. Outside is also the best. It adds another element of positivity to your experience.
I like that. All right, now I'm sure that a lot of people listening know that we've only scratched the surface on a lot of these topics. So where could they go to learn more about your work?
Well, one of the best places is going to my website. My website is johnratey.com, and that can lead you on a rabbit hole through various, there's a bunch of videos right there, but lead you to a lot of different information. And then I have a nonprofit called sparkinglife.org, which has a lot of reviews of my previous work. And currently we support a Facebook page called John Ratey, MD, that every day there's a new article that's in the popular press. It's usually a review of some research or acknowledging some amazing program that's been highlighted in the New York Times or Time Magazine or Forbes or someplace that we post every day. And so it's a constant source of motivation and stimulus.
Awesome. I'll link to all that in the show notes. Dr. Ratey, it's been great having you on the podcast. I really appreciate your time and all the information you shared today.
Okay. Well, good luck to you. Thank you.
Your best. Losers always whine about their best.